In the books I loved, in Titans and New Warriors and X-Men, they were all soap operas, but the superhero action was forefront, the soap opera was the background. My intention was to just kind of flip that dynamic.
Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Hello everyone, these are the Welcome to Geektown interviews. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to my patrons. We have a new citizen of Geektown named Bill Fishman. Thank you to you and the others who continue to support the show, which are Judd Winnick, Mike Sterling, Justin Bailey, Lily and Sam Breen, Jesse Clark, Ricky Garvin, Carla Hoffman, Julio Herrera, and Matthew Saint. As always, I truly appreciate you all. And if you want to join in, you can do so for just $1 per month at patreon.com/welcome to Geektown and be part of the shoutout, as well as get access to uncut versions of the interviews and additional audio and scripts for the previous written shows. Now, let's get to the real business. I'm continuing my interview with writer Jay Faerber. We'll get into the start of his television writing career and some of the behind the scenes of how a writing room generally works, but we have some more comic book stuff to cover first, which includes one of my personal favorite projects of his, the soap-inspired Noble Causes. Well, then let's get into your creator-owned books,
Sure.
Starting with Noble Causes.
The one that started it all.
Yeah, for any of my listeners not familiar with that title, can you give the basic concept for that and what inspired it?
Sure. I mentioned earlier that I was a soap opera nerd, and This is where I flexed those muscles. It was basically the Fantastic Four meets the Kennedy family, or Dynasty with superpowers. It was a superhero soap opera about the Noble family, who were a family of world-famous superheroes. There was a mother, father, kids, in-laws, different rivalries. And the conceit of the book was like, this is all the stuff that happens when they're not saving the world. All the soap opera subplots, in the books I loved, in Titans and New Warriors and X-Men, they were all soap operas. But the superhero action was forefront, the soap opera was the background. My intention was to just kind of flip that dynamic. And yeah, it was well received. The book was never a big hit, but it had a pretty passionate fan base, and we had a nice run at Image for a long time.
Yeah. Were there any particular soap operas that you watched that were your influences?
Yeah, I'm a pretty hardcore General Hospital guy. I watched Days of Our Lives a little bit in high school. There was like one summer when I got into it, but General Hospital's I've been watching that off and on for 30 years. I discovered it in college, and I've just been kind of dipping in and out ever since.
Okay. Big Luke and Laura.
they were actually, I like them, but they were, when I came to the show, they were no longer on it. But I was there for their big return in 93, 94. I forget.
Got it. Now, this was only 10 years after Image Comics had first formed. What was the process of getting a book published there at the time when you weren't one of the founding members?
Boy, it was the early days at Image. It was a little chaotic. It wasn't Image's early days per se, but it was, it is now, I guess, in hindsight. Jim Valentino was the editor-in-chief at the time, or publisher, whatever his title was. I think publisher. Mm-hmm. And Anthony Bozzi was the head of marketing. And I pitched them the book after I had been to a Wizard World in Chicago and went to dinner with some Image creators, because I was starting to get the itch to do something else besides Marvel and DC. And we had dinner, and I just heard all these great stories from all these creators about how fun it is and just the creative freedom. And at the time, believe it or not, Image wasn't really doing any superhero books. They had Savage Dragon And that was about it. And so I asked Jim, I was like, hey, are you guys open to a superhero book? And he was like, yes, like we would love one. Please pitch us one. And so I did. I went out and found an artist and found like put it together myself, found some nobody named CB Sobolski, who at the time was kicking around the industry. He was kind of a freelance editor and publisher. And I forget how the hell we hit it off, but we met at a con, I think, and just became friends. And then I kind of hired him because I had no idea how to make a comic aside from writing a script. I brought CB in to just help me, from a managerial standpoint. And he stuck around, like he was only involved initially getting the book off the ground. And then he kind of went off to do his own thing and has flourished clearly.
Yeah.
He's publisher of Marvel. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, for my listeners who aren't aware, he is the editor-in-chief at Marvel these days, so...
Yeah. So, and then it was, the pitch. I sent in like a proper pitch, just the way Image wanted it, with like a written synopsis and 5 sequential pages that were written and lettered and everything. And I think I waited a little while, but then right around Christmas, I remember getting a call from Valentino that said like, yeah, let's do it. We want to do it. And then it was just a matter of getting, schedules solidified and stuff. But the approval process was very quick.
Nice. In the first impressions one shot,
mm-hmm.
You mentioned on the back page that it had already been optioned for TV.
Oh, right.
Were you already looking to move over to television writing at that point? Or
I wasn't. I was still, I'm trying to think where I was living. I think I was in New York and then moved to LA. So I had a brief stay in LA in like 2001 to 2003, I think, and
mm-hmm.
made a brief stab at screenwriting. It didn't take, and I moved back to Seattle and then came back down here in like 2011. So I wasn't really serious about TV at that point. It was optioned for a few grand maybe by an independent producer, and they were trying to set it up. I think he had a deal at Sci-Fi Channel. Or no, they were trying to set it up. This was back in like the syndicated TV days, where they were going to try to set it up as like a syndicated show.
Yeah.
And nothing ever happened beyond that option. And then a few years later, it got optioned again at USA/Sci-Fi. And that got real. That was real enough that like I made a deal with Sci-Fi and USA, and a different writer was coming in to write it. And then that flamed out at the script stage as well. And that's been the only 2 real swings.
You ended Noble Causes on a bit of a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
When you write something like that, do you have the decision Doc Noble made set in your mind, or did you play around with? Okay.
No, because it was because it was the last issue, I never had to. I was setting it up as a cliffhanger. Like I wanted it to be an open question. And then a year or 2 ago, Image had a big anniversary, and I did an 8-page, I think, story that featured them again. And I'm trying to think if I even answered it. I think I skated around it. I don't think I answered it. But it was about Doc getting married to somebody. Oh, yeah. It was Doc getting married to Maddie from Dynamo 5. I was bringing those 2 worlds together even closer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I dodged the question as to who he picked in that moment before. But whoever it was, it didn't work out.
I was going to say, a lot of those early creator books, like Dynamo 5, Firebirds, Gemini, all featured characters from other books at one point or another. And also, you brought in Invincible and some of his related characters. Was that all stuff you wanted to do, or was there kind of a bit of a push to create like an Image universe?
There, both. When I created, so I did Noble Causes, and then shortly thereafter, Jim Valentino, when he was still publisher, wanted to create an Image universe, like a new line of Image superhero books that they would have a big push.
Mm-hmm.
And he invited a handful of us to be involved. And it was Robert Kirkman with Invincible. It was me with Venture. That was what I paired up with Jamal Igle on. It was a handful of other people. Fire Breather from Phil Hester was part of that.
Okay.
And I remember there were some other creators who ended up not doing books. Jim's initial idea, the initial directive was, I want to start a universe like from the ground up. start in a world where there are no superheroes, nothing fantastic, and let's start with the first instance of a superhuman and go from there. But then some of the people who were involved in the discussion stage didn't want to do that. Like Jamal and I took that to heart, and we built Venture as this immortal god walking amongst us who has never revealed himself to us anymore. So I mean, he was here all the time, but like no
Right.
one knew about him. He was totally in secret. But then meanwhile, one of the other creators wanted to do like a second generation superhero. And this wasn't Invincible. This is something else. So the official line never really came apart. It came together. It fell apart. We still did Venture, and Phil did Fire Breather. Invincible, I think, was already in development, so it was going to happen regardless.
Okay.
So there was initially supposed to be like an official Image superhero line that fizzled out, but from the ashes of it, a handful of superhero books did get launched, and then it was just a matter of like being the superhero nerd. I loved crossovers and playing in the big sandbox.
Yeah.
So if I ever had something where other heroes are going to be involved, I would always ask Robert and Eric and Phil and whoever to use some of their characters. And most of the time they would say yes. I think Robert, I wasn't able to use Invincible or one of Robert's characters late in the game. And this is like Robert Kirkman had become too corporate, I think. And so like, I don't even know that the question even got to him, but like whoever, someone in his company is like, no, you may not have his character in your book. But it's a funny story. Robert, he would also use my characters in his books occasionally as well, which was super flattering.
Right.
And one time he did it without even asking me. I picked up an issue of Invincible and there's Dynamo 5 in there. And I was like, oh, okay. Which I'm fine with. I just thought it was funny. Another fun Robert Kirkman fact with Invincible: Noble Causes came out first. Invincible was in development. And then Jim Valentino, or no, well, it was just the Invincible issue, or sorry, Noble Causes issue. Basically, Invincible shows up in Noble Causes before Invincible #1 came out. So his official first appearance is in an issue of Noble Causes, Family Secrets, I think. And then his actual book came out like a week or two later. It's just a little fun bit of trivia about Invincible.
Nice.
Yeah.
Probably makes that issue sell a little more on the back issue market.
It might. Yeah.
So when you're doing creator-owned books, I'm assuming you have a lot more input on which artists you're working with.
Yeah.
How do you find the right penciler for each project?
It's kind of, a lot of it is instinct, is just kind of seeing a look that feels right. In terms of literally how, a lot of it is just scouring the internet. Like DeviantArt was a big place I used to go to. I don't go there as much anymore. I mean, I don't do as much in comics, but DeviantArt was a big one. A gold mine back in the late 90s or early 2000s, I guess, was Digital Webbing, which had a very active artists forum of aspiring pros. And that's where I found Mahmoud, who I developed Dynamo 5 with, and Yildiray, who came on to Noble Causes. I found them in this forum. And so it was an exciting time in the early 2000s of the online comic community. I think was small enough that you kind of knew everybody in it. So you could, it was easy to find artists and stuff. Now it's so spread out, and there's so many people much more involved now. It's harder for me to like cut through the noise to find somebody who's really what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So it's a lot these days, because I have enough of a history and enough peers, I'll usually put the feelers out with friends of mine. Like, do you know somebody who'd be up for a gig like this? And I have, this kind of subject matter. And sometimes I'll get good leads that way.
When you're working on someone, or when you're working with someone who hasn't done a monthly book before, did you take any extra steps to ensure that the book could come out on time?
Yeah. I mean, as much as I could, as much as anybody can. I mean, we would, try to bank it to that, we wouldn't put it out until we had 3 issues in the can, or until we had 5 issues, or until, and life always happens. There's no way to safeguard that, sadly, especially at this level where like none of us are making much money. So it's hard if somebody's fallen behind because they had to take another job or their day job was getting in the way. So yeah, there's only so much we can do, sadly.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into your TV writing career.
Sure.
It looks like about 2011 when that started, doing a few episodes of the show Ringer.
Yep.
As I understand it, getting into television writing is even more difficult than breaking into the comic book industry, especially with the unions involved.
Yes. Yeah, it's challenging.
So how long had you been trying before you got your first script on the air, and what was that process like?
So my process was, I was living in Seattle at the time. I was just starting to get some traction. My book, Dynamo 5, I had a Hollywood manager at this point. Not so much because I wanted to write scripts, but to represent my comics in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a kind of a young writer who wanted to develop a Dynamo 5 movie. And I flew down here to meet with her, and we had a lunch and we talked about it. And it sounded fine. I don't think she hadn't had anything produced or anything. She was still pretty green. And I was staying at Brian Vaughn's house while I was in town. And I went over and, after this meeting with her, and I was debriefing with Brian and his wife. And they were like, why is someone else writing this? Why aren't you writing it? Like, you could do this just as easily as she can. And it really just was one of those moments I'll always remember where I was just like, yeah, why aren't I writing this? And so I emailed my manager and I was like, hey, like, I'm sorry, but I want to write this. And, I don't want her to do it. And so I wrote a version of it on spec just to have a sample. My manager signed off on it. It never went anywhere, but it at least started me in the process. And then I decided, like, I want to really make a go of this. And I was always more of a TV guy than a movie guy. And so at that time, the different TV studios all had not internships, but development programs where they would hire or bring in, not hire per se, but a set number of writers, 8, 10, 12, whatever, and take them through a writer's boot camp and then try to staff them on their shows. NBC had one, ABC, Disney had one, CBS had one, Warner Brothers had one. I applied to a bunch of them. You have to apply with a spec script, which is a sample of an existing show. So I wrote a burn notice spec and sent that around, and I got a meeting on the Warner Brothers program. So I flew down to LA and had this in-person interview with a couple of different Warner Brothers people. And then a few months later, I got in. And getting in meant you had to be there in person. So I had to quit at that point, I was doing real estate appraisals in Washington. So I quit that, drove down to LA and dove into this. And it wasn't a paid position or anything. It was something, it was like a workshop that would meet, I think it was either once or twice a week in the evenings for 2 or 3 hours. And there would be a lecture component, and then like there would be exercises you would do, like mock writer's room kind of things. They would bring in directors and agents and executives to talk to us. It was really very helpful. And then the best part about it is that as part of that program, once you successfully complete it, you're quote unquote free to any Warner Brothers show that wants you. So you wouldn't come out of their budget. It's an incentive to get showrunners to take a chance on a new writer. And so that's how I got on Ringer, was I was free for the first 20 weeks of their season. And then after the 20 weeks, if they wanted me, they'd have to pay up and keep me as part of their budget, which they did. I had a great experience on Ringer. That was how I got in that writer's room. And I wrote one and then co-wrote 2 more. And the show shot in LA, which is pretty rare. So we got to be there to shoot our episodes. And I got all kinds of on-hand experience being on set. So yeah, it was great.
Nice. On TV, even if you end up being the only person credited as a writer for a particular episode, which in of itself is rare, you're still working with other writers, especially since the showrunner is usually one of the writers.
Right.
Can you break down the typical process of putting together a script and how it gets decided who gets credit?
Sure. And the answer is there's many different ways.
Right.
There's some shows I heard, I don't know if this is true, but I had heard on Grey's Anatomy at one point, at least, I don't know if this is always true, that every script was group written, which means The writers all talk through an episode together. They beat out, they decide on the structure and what's going to happen in every scene, and then those scenes are divvied up amongst the writers. And somebody takes Act 1, somebody takes Act 2, somebody takes Act 3, or they'll divide them up by storyline. Somebody takes Meredith's storyline for the episode. Somebody takes McDreamy's storyline for the episode, and then some writer will be nominated to then weave them all together to piece it together.
Right.
And from what I understand, Grey's would do that on every single episode, and then there was just a cycle of who would get credit. It was just kind of a rotation. That I've never experienced that firsthand. The shows I've been on, everything is sort of broken, and when I say broken, I mean kind of dreamed up and thought through and not outlined, but jotted down and thoroughly explained collaboratively with the showrunner, with all the writers in the room. Sometimes somebody might be off on script, but as much as the room is available, everybody has input. In some rooms, it's known ahead of time who's writing the episode. You're told. Some shows are super well organized, and you're told at the start of the season, here's the writer's schedule. Episode 1 is this person, 2 is this person. When I was on Star-Crossed, we did it that way. The writers had a plan, and we knew from the get-go who was writing when. And it worked out great because I got married that year, and I got a different episode than I normally would have because of my wedding. They were able to flip it because they had it planned out ahead of time. Other shows will be breaking the episode and have been talking about it for a week, figuring it out, getting everything squared away, and still not know who's going to write it. I've heard showrunners say that they do that so that you're invested in everything, that everybody's equally invested, because they believe if it's your episode that you're writing, you'll be super invested, but the other writers may not be as invested, which may be true. So an example of how we break it down, a lot of times the showrunner will have some kind of initial idea of what they want the episode to be, or most of the shows I've worked on have been serialized, so we're just inheriting whatever is in the previous episode. And then we just start with, we usually work on a whiteboard, and it's just breaking down, talking through the scene, talking through the story, talking through the emotional journey of the character. What do we want them to experience this episode? Are there big tentpole moments we want to happen for our mythology? Is this the episode where they find out there's a traitor or whatever? We do all that stuff. We break it out onto a whiteboard. We usually put it in columns as to acts 1 through 6 or 1 through 5, whatever there are. When I was on Zoo, we usually had 2 or 3 storylines per episode, and we would break them separately. And then after we knew what was happening in each storyline, then we would blend them together. And okay, what's our first scene? That's going to be from this story. Oh, then we would cut to this story. And then what's our act out, which is what happens before the commercial break. That should be this big moment. And then when that's all done, then a writer goes off. Well, sometimes there's a story area, which is a short document that you send to the studio and the network telling them what the episode's going to be about. It can be as short as 2 pages, as long as 5 or 6, but it's just a bare bones in kind of paragraph form of this is the broad strokes of the episode. And then you'll have a call about that, and they'll raise any questions or apprehensions, and you'll make any adjustments. Then once that's settled, you go off to outline. That's taking those columns that you beat out on the whiteboard and turning it into an outline, which runs anywhere from 12 to 25 pages. And that's where you have scene headings like a script, interior, Fortress of Solitude, and then you would write down what happens. There's just no dialogue, and it's sort of summarized. Superman arrives at the fortress and discovers Lex Luthor has detonated the bomb. Next scene, new slug line, exterior Metropolis. And, there's just no dialogue. It's just kind of a summary of what's happening.
Right.
And then then you'll get notes on that from the studio and the network and your showrunner. Then once that's signed off on by everybody, then the writer goes off to script. Some shows you'll be co-writing. They'll assign it to 2 people, and you'll divvy it up. Either people will take different acts, or like I said before, you'll follow different storylines. And then whenever the script is done, it goes to the showrunner. Some shows, they'll do group notes. where the script goes to everyone and you'll sit around a conference table and everybody kind of gives notes. Other shows, the showrunner is the only one who gives you notes, or maybe they're number two, they're second in command. And then hopefully the writer will get a chance to address those notes and do a second pass. And then it goes to the studio and the network and you get notes from them as well. And then once they weigh in on it, then you issue your production draft. And that's what goes to production, to everybody who needs to make the show. And there are some times where you'll turn in a draft of the script, your first draft, sometimes your second, and the showrunner will just take it at that point. And then they'll do a rewrite of it, do a pass. Sometimes they change a lot. Sometimes the fact that they had to change a lot reflects badly on you. Sometimes they're going to change a lot regardless of how you did your job. That's just their process. Your job is navigating that for your own mental health and, just politically. But you're always, on a TV show, you're almost always going to be rewritten by somebody, unless it's your show.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how much.
And how long does that process take from first meeting to production script?
As long as it needs to. Generally, we would try to do, like, some shows we would say, like, we're going to break this episode in a week, meaning 5 days, Monday through Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it meant like Monday to Tuesday or Wednesday of the following week. It would usually take 6, 7, 8 days to get an episode off the board, broken the way thoroughly so that the person writing it knew what was happening in every single scene and what they were supposed to write. And then they would have, some shows would build it where you would have 2 weeks to write your draft. Some shows you'd have 1 week. Some shows you'd go off on Friday and they would need a draft on Monday. Like it kind of depends on how behind you are in the schedule. And then notes would come pretty quickly. If you turn your script in, you should get notes in the next day or two. And then you would usually have a day or two to turn them around, depending on how extensive they were. And then there are times where if the show's already in production and there are hard script deadlines and we're not hitting them, sometimes we'll send an outline to production ahead of time. Or the script that we send to the studio will go to them knowing, like, hey, this isn't the final draft yet, but it's enough for you to start. Oh, we have a bank we have to build this episode. And, okay, we need this many henchmen and, that kind of thing, just to give them some kind of ballpark to start working on. But that's a worst case scenario.
Next week, as we wrap up, we'll talk about some of the specific shows that Jay has contributed to as a writer, including the CW Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover. Come back for that, or if you want to hear it all now, you can become a patron for just $1 per month and get access to the full uncut version of all of my interviews, as well as a monthly shoutout and written and extra audio content from the previous version of the show. If you'd like a free way to help the show out, leaving a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or other podcast site is always appreciated. Either way, as long as you continue to listen, we'll always say,
welcome to Geektown. Population, us.
Questions for the Welcome to Geektown interviews are written by me, Kurt Onstead. I also host, edit, and produce the podcast. Theme song was written by Aaron Lovitz, logo art by Archie Santana.